All right, but enough fooling around with all that garbage. We do got a really, really outstanding interview here with Brent Zwerneman of the Houston Chronicle. I think all SEC fans, and particularly Texas A&M, will appreciate Brent and the knowledge he's dropped here on the show. We're pleased to once again be joined by Brent Zwerneman. He's an outstanding SEC insider, covers Texas A&M for the Houston Chronicle, and he's authored several books on the Texas A&M Aggies. So, Brent, thank you so much for once again joining the show. I really appreciate it.
You bet, Mike. Hopefully one of those books one day will be talking about A&M. I'm not even going to say winning a national. I'm going to say making the college football playoff, because I've done this for a quarter century now, and still, I covered one conference champion in 1998. So maybe now they'll be, closing in on that elusive national title that they've been seeking since 1939.
Well, it could be worse, Brent. You could be covering this mess down at Auburn. How fortunate are you to not be having to cover the Brian Harsin saga?
Isn't that the truth? Because you do get the idea with Jimbo, and I'll say this, and feel like I know him pretty well. The man is all about football. The man loves, breathes, eats, however you want to put it, football. And I feel like there's just, if we're, I don't think, and maybe let me find some wood to knock on here, Mike, that any kind of like off the field scandals or anything, that's just really not even part of the equation, because Jimbo's just so wrapped up in coaching this football team and trying to get them back and proving that he can do it in more than one place, and that he didn't just take over for Bobby Bowden at a historically or recently historically good program at Florida State and win a title. He wants to show he can do it at a place that it hasn't been done since pre-World War II.
Now, the main reason I wanted to have you on, Brent, is, of course, to talk about, A&M's incredible success on the recruiting trail and all that entails with that. But before I ask you about that, is there a sense at all in College Station around that program that last season was maybe a little bit of a disappointment when you consider the team they had, and of course they knocked off Alabama, which you predicted they would do in the preseason, yet they turn around and they lose to the Mississippi schools, they lose to Arkansas, they lose that heartbreaker to LSU. What's the sense there of last season of just kind of dropping the ball a little bit there?
Yeah, Mike, I predicted an A&M win over Alabama, but I also did not predict Mississippi State and Mike Leach would roll into Kyle Field and get a victory. So, and of course, Arkansas with Sam Pittman in his second year, they topple the Aggies up in Arlington at that neutral site game this year for the first time in years. So those things were head scratchers, because honestly, that schedule that the Aggies had was probably their most favorable since they've joined the SEC from the Big 12 in 2012, because their non-conference schedule was very forgiving in years past. Like when Jimbo took over, they had Clemson as a non-conference foe, and he joked that he thought he was getting away from them by leaving the ACC and so forth. So if there was going to be a year where they were going to be right in the mix and competing for an SEC title, especially getting Alabama and Auburn on your home field, I thought it was going to be 2021. So, yeah, they pulled off the upset, but absolutely, to answer your question, there was a ton of disappointment with the idea that they finished 8-4 in the regular season. I think early in the year they had risen as high as number 5 in the nation. Of course, last year they'd finished number 4. Here's what happened, of course. Haynes King had won the starting quarterback job over Zach Calzada, and Haynes King went down with a broken leg in week 2 and was out for the season. Well, Jimbo had told us that it was a fairly close competition. Now, it probably wasn't as close as all that, but he had also said both guys are NFL quarterbacks. So I kind of took him on his word on that. Well, Zach Calzada had an awful lot of growing to do still at that point. And of course, he did manage to pull off the upset of Alabama, but that was probably their biggest thing that held them back, was quarterback play in terms of being right in the mix for the SEC title. The defense, of course, was once again outstanding under Mike Elko. So you wonder what would have happened if Haynes King had stayed healthy. But on the flip side, Jimbo brought Zach Calzada to A&M as a scholarship quarterback with the idea that he would compete for starter. So you wouldn't have thought that there would be as much drop-off as there is. Now that's what's shaping up, is with Calzada now gone to Auburn, as you mentioned, the mess going on there. Now that's really shaping up as probably the most interesting storyline of the offseason for the Aggies. What's going to happen at quarterback?
Now, how surprised were you, Brent? You were the one that asked the question in the National Signing Day press conference, Jimbo Fisher and all this NIL discussion, and the rival coaches even essentially saying A&M's only having success because they're paying for all these players. And it really seemed like Jimbo Fisher took personal offense to this and really wanted to get this off his chest. And as a secondary question, have you tracked down Sliced Bread? You got an interview with him yet?
I'm still trying to find Eric Dickerson's Trans Am that Texas A&M or a Texas A&M booster allegedly gave me. So I'm trying to take it one mystery at a time here, Mike. They were saying, I don't know what happened to that Trans Am. I gave it to a buddy, and then so on and so forth. But no Sliced Bread. To answer your second question, the first question was, Jimbo could not wait to get that off his chest. We had not visited with him since back during the holidays when they were still planning on going to the Gator Bowl at that time, before COVID-19 issues kept them out of the Gator Bowl against Wake Forest. So Jimbo was, I happened to have the microphone first, and he could not wait. And I asked a short question, and he took it for the next 3 or 4 minutes. And I do see his point in that, okay, Mike, I've covered A&M, football for close to a quarter century. Was gone for a couple of years there, somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. I had never covered more than 2 top 10 classes in a row. No coach had ever put more than 2 together. Jimbo, this was his 4th consecutive top 10, all 4 classes being his first full recruiting classes. Now, of course, he inherited one when he came on board that was not top 10. So it wasn't like they went from number 45 in recruiting suddenly to number 1. I mean, they had been in the top 10. He had built to this. They were 9-1 last year with the number 4 finish, win in the Orange Bowl. Things were looking up. So all that played into it. But also there is no doubt 100% that the NIL aspect has helped the Aggies as well. You've got 500,000 former students, oil money, as I said, deeper pockets than a West Texas oil well, in terms of putting all that together. And even Ross Bjork, the athletic director at A&M, told me, he goes, yeah, they feel fortunate to have this incredible fan base that's so passionate about football. So you combine those things. You combine the relentless recruiting of Jimbo Fisher and his staff, which no doubt they have been getting after it from the time he stepped foot on campus, to the NIL, the new way of doing things in the prospects there. I'll put it that way, in terms of being able to have a good life in college, financially. So you put all those things together, and suddenly they have what was ended up being the number 1 ranked class of all time. I really shouldn't say of all time. None of us should. It's really in the internet era, because as we know, you go back to before there were scholarship limits, a program back in the day like Texas or what have you, or Alabama, they would stock up on guys that would never even see the field, but they would keep them away from other programs. So you can't really say all time, but you can certainly say of the internet era of the past couple of decades that this class was up there. So yeah, it's a combination of such. But I will say Jimbo's done. I mean, he's hardcore on the recruiting front, and he gets after it. And and you've seen this place is pretty crazy on a college football Saturday as well, which certainly helps draw recruits.
Do you think Jimbo took that personally at all? Because it certainly seems to me that Nick Saban and Kirby Smart, and of course to a lesser extent Lane Kiffin, it seems like they're threatened that A&M is going to continue at this historic pace of recruiting. And of course Georgia and Alabama, they're used to getting whoever they want, and now it doesn't seem. And now it almost, I don't want to say evens the playing field, because we're still only talking about a handful of teams here, but it just seems like it's elevated A&M, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
I don't think so. The way Jimbo put it was, in talking directly to his coaches through the press conference, get used to it, as he said, because we're not going anywhere, was the quote. I will say this, with these guys that they were able to bring on board, 7 5-stars. And I've been around this program long enough where I remember it was a big deal when they got 1 5-star in a class. Mm-hmm. Now suddenly they have 7. But you were able to, with A&M especially losing a lot of guys on the defensive line and everything to the NFL, they were able to promise, or, hey, you're going to have every opportunity to have early playing time. When you step foot on campus, chances are you're going to be playing as a true freshman in front of 100,000 fans. So I do think that helped. So I'll be curious to see as they continue to stack these classes on board. Jimbo's then going to have to change it to, hey, you want to be a part of this program that can help eventually get you to the NFL and perhaps even redshirt and so forth. So the message is maybe going to have to change a little bit, because with these guys, like even Connor Wegman, the quarterback, hey, 5-star guy out of Houston, Connor, you're going to get a chance. You're going to get a chance to start as a freshman. So, but yes, with the combination of Jimbo's recruiting and the NIL, that certainly can't be discounted. That you would think moving forward, as long as the NCAA keeps it like this, that A&M is going to be a major player on that front.
Now, I don't know if the expectations can get any higher in College Station. I mean, when Jimbo got hired, they famously gave him the national championship trophy with the date yet to be determined. Does signing a class of this stature, does it raise the expectations that that promise will be fulfilled by Jimbo and his staff?
It certainly should. And yeah, and he knows that. He said the next step is, can they play? As he said, can that dog hunt? In terms of, you got to get them out on the field and coach them up and develop them as well. But there is no question with Jimbo's recent raise, again, an extension of a few years again to his contract to make it the original 10 years that it was a few years ago, up in the $9 to $10 million range when it all adds up annually. No question about it that there are huge expectations, and he knows that. He's aware of that, which I think is also part of his recent, rant or whatever you want to call it. He knows that the expectations are big now in College Station, and that for instance, okay, Mikey, A&M beat Alabama. That was at Kyle Field, and it was a close game. 41-38 came down to a last-second field goal. Well, he's well aware now. Texas A&M is going to Bryant-Denny Stadium in 2022, and the Crimson Tide are mad. And they've been stacking these number 1 and 2 classes together for years, whereas A&M is still new to it. He's aware of all that, but he's also aware that A&M fans don't really want to hear that. They want to compete for a conference title for the first time in 20 years. It's been almost a quarter century. You're getting in that range now, because it was 1998 when they last won a conference title, and that was as part of the Big 12 when they upset Kansas State, when Kansas State would have been playing in the national title game. They haven't really come close since then, and now they've been a decade in the SEC. So all those things add up to A&M fans saying, okay, it's time. There are no more excuses. This is now the time to be in the mix for an SEC title. And as you know, if you're in the mix for an SEC title, then you're probably going to be in the mix for a national title as well.
Do you sense any, I don't know if pressure is the right word, but from the alumni, from the administration, from the coaches, everybody involved with Texas A&M to ensure that their program is on a higher level than the Texas Longhorns currently? But we all know the Longhorns are coming to the SEC. Do you think that any of this NIL and the recruiting success has anything to do with trying to ensure that they remain ahead of Texas before the Longhorns get into the SEC? Because I think it's clear that A&M's at an advantage at the moment, but they've got to keep the steam on if they're gonna stay ahead of Texas before Texas comes into the league.
The sense I've gotten from Ross Bjork, the athletic director, John Sharp, the chancellor, and on down the line, I don't really know the new president, Kathy Banks. I haven't really gotten to know her, yet. She's, I believe, been in that position less than a year, right around a year, and that they believe in Jim. Like, they don't feel like Jimbo needs any prodding, and from what I've seen, he doesn't. I mean, the man is absolutely driven, and all these things to prove people wrong and to prove that he can do it at A&M. So I don't see that kind of pressure. If you were going to say there was pressure, it would definitely be from the former students who are saying, okay, we've paid all this money. We put $500 million into Kyle Field 5-6 years ago, now it's time. And to your point, I personally, as a fifth generation Texan, I was really excited to hear, because when Texas was, when we found out they were going to the SEC, my first thought wasn't about the Longhorns competing in the SEC. It was, hey, that means the game is back.
Mm-hmm.
And by the game, I mean A&M versus Texas, which was the biggest deal in the state for decades. And suddenly it was gone. Poof, it's been gone for the past decade. So yes, there is no question now that the bar has been raised in terms of saying, okay, now Texas can also recruit to the best league in the nation by far, and make these promises of saying, hey, these guys are all headed to the NFL. You can be too. So A&M certainly wants to keep that momentum going, because as we've already seen with Texas having the number 5 overall class, NIL came into big play with them as well. They Horns with Heart was this charity organization that was cranked up with the idea of giving the offensive linemen $50,000 annually to lend their name to the charity and so forth. So yeah, they're not messing around either on the NIL front. And they were very upfront about that. And suddenly they signed probably their best O-line class in history. Next thing you know, Sarkisian has them up to number 5 in the overall rankings. So it's something I kind of personally look forward to in coming years. Those recruiting battles, those finally on-field battles, really kind of heating up, and that being just a huge deal, not only in the state of Texas, but in the SEC, because the rivalry is back.
Now, of course, you were the one that broke that news, Brent, at SEC Media Days. I mean, everybody was doing double takes. I think even on SEC Network, on live television, they basically dismissed the whole Texas and Oklahoma coming to the SEC. And if memory serves, it was about 72 hours later it was official. I cannot recall anything happening at that warp speed, but considering your outstanding insight and news-breaking ability, can you provide any insight into maybe an updated timeline and into when Texas and Oklahoma could be joining the SEC? And last thing for you, because you just referenced it, I mean, I'm right there with you. I'm dying to see Texas and Texas A&M on the field again. When the Longhorns come to the SEC, do you anticipate that will be an annual matchup? Because I know there was, some speculation that may not be the case. What can you tell us about any of that?
Yeah, the timeline, I really thought, Mike, going back to the summer, because I'd seen it a decade ago with Texas A&M when things just really, to use your term, really picked up with warp speed when the Aggies said they were exiting the Big 12, and then Missouri hopped on as well for the SEC, that it went from, hey, that's in a couple of years to 1 year. I really thought at that time it was going to pick up speed so much that it was going to be 2022. Mm-hmm. From what I understand, Texas had the money ready to roll. Of course, they had the Longhorn Network that they were ready to roll into the SEC Network and so forth, and ESPN. Oklahoma was maybe the one a little behind on that front. I still say I do not see how it would drag past 2023 at this point in terms of saying that's, I just don't see it being any later than that at this point. And also, yes, absolutely on the annual rivalry, because it's it's not just a little bit of a moneymaker. It's a massive moneymaker on that front. So it will definitely be an annual rivalry, 1 year in College Station, 1 year in Austin, none of this neutral site type stuff. They're going to get it back to campus, and it will be every year and around Thanksgiving weekend, just like the old days, because that was, back in the day when the Dallas Cowboys would play the Houston Oilers, that was a pretty big deal. Mm-hmm. But Texas A&M versus Texas is the biggest sporting event in the state of Texas, and people outside, what Aggies and Longhorns have to understand, they say, oh, we don't really want that, especially the Aggies. We don't need that series. It's bigger than that. It's for the state of Texas. It's for Texans, in this area, this region. And so that's why it will be back on an annual basis, because they're not going to pass up that opportunity to make a ton of money off of it as well.
All right, some outstanding stuff there, Brent. I really, really appreciate it. Everyone give Brent Zwerneman a follow on Twitter at Brent Zwerneman, and check out all his outstanding work over at the Houston Chronicle covering Texas A&M and the SEC. Brent, thank you again for joining the show. Really, really appreciate it.
You bet, Mike, and I'm really appreciate you not asking me about Texas A&M basketball, so thank you.
All right, so just want to say thanks again to Brent for joining the show. One of the best, not only news breakers in the SEC, he's breaking news left and right when it comes to the Aggie program and what's going on with Jimbo's Texas A&M Aggies. You got to give him a follow on Twitter and check out all his work for the Houston Chronicle. And just thanks again for the quality time that he's provided me on this show. I really, really appreciate it. But hey, that's going to do it for this week's editions of the show. Hopefully we'll get Cousin Shane. I have confirmation. He is back from vacation. Shane takes a vacation for about 3 weeks while the rest of us gets 4 or 5 days down there in Florida. He is just now on his way back. So hopefully maybe we'll get Cousin Shane on here to break down the Super Bowl, something like that. We didn't even get to talk much about that, but that game is loaded with SEC talent on both sides of the ball, Cincinnati and the Rams. That's going to be a fun game to watch with, even if you're not a fan of either one of those teams, which I'm not, but I'm looking forward to it with all the SEC connections. So have a great time this weekend. Check out the Super Bowl. Be safe, everybody, and we'll catch you on the next one.